The esplanade of Edinburgh Castle has seen more than its fair share of public executions. Men and women who'd fallen foul of the law could find themselves on the block, on the gallows, or at the stake. Among those burned at the stake was Janet Douglas, Lady Glamis, who was put to death on 17th July, 1537. At the time, James V was king. He was known as the good man of Ballingeich, well liked by his subjects, and did good for the country. But he also had a dark side, especially where the Douglases were concerned. He had his reasons. As a youngster, he'd suffered at their hands. Archibald Douglas, Earl of Angus and known as Red Douglas, was Chancellor of Scotland and second husband to Margaret Tudor, James's mother. He had power over the young king, holding him prisoner. That was until 1528, when James was 17 and he escaped Douglas's grasp. The nobles rallied round him and helped overthrow the Douglases, killing them by order of the king or forcing them to flee across the border into England. From then on, James had an implacable hatred of the Douglas family, and once said, "No Douglas shall find refuge in Scotland while I am king." There was only one Douglas left unscathed, and that was a woman who'd married, so changed her name, and at least for a time, James left her in comparative peace. This was Janet Douglas, Lady Glamis, the sister of James's hated stepfather, the Earl of Angus, who'd been banished from the country. Her first husband, John Lyon, 6th Lord Glamis, had died, and a few years later she'd married Archibald Campbell of Skipnish, second son of Archibald Campbell, 2nd Earl of Argyll, living in a remote part of the country to keep out of the king's way. Thanks to a rejected suitor, William Lyon, a relative of her dead husband, she came under the scrutiny of the crown. She was described as a beautiful young woman. In one account, she was described as the most celebrated beauty in the nation. She was of middle stature, not too fat, her face of an oval form with full eyes, her complexion extremely fair and beautiful, with a majestic mien. She had many suitors before she married a second time, but Lyon persisted even after she was married. She rejected him time and time again until finally he got the message. His love turned to hate, and he turned his thoughts to the king, who he knew hated the Douglases. Leaks were made, and the king heard of a treasonous plot, with Lady Glamis at the heart of it. He was told she was in cahoots with her exiled brother, and hoped to restore his power and overthrow the king. Lyon's work was done. Lady Glamis, her husband, and her son, 16-year-old John, Lord Glamis, as well as her chaplain, were all taken to Edinburgh, where they were imprisoned to await trial. The king confiscated Glamis Castle, and her servants were placed on the rack. Soon, in pain and terror, confessions came, and they implicated their mistress in the plot to poison the king. This was her most serious charge, as others included that she'd been writing to her brother with the idea of overthrowing James. However, there was no proof to uphold the poisoning charge. Even the English governor of Berwick wrote that he could perceive no substantial ground or proof of the matter, and that was the opinion of most of the judges. In front of them, Lady Glamis made a spirited defence of herself. She is reported to have said, "I am here accused for purposing to kill the king, and to make my pretended crime more frightful, it is given out that the way was to be by poison. Poison! I never saw poison. Let them tell me where I bought it, or who procured it for me. Or, though I had it, how could I use it, since I never came near the king's person, his table, nor his palace?" Her arguments were futile, so in her final plea to the judges, she said, "It is the office of you judges to protect innocence from injury. But if the malice and powers of my enemies be such, that whether guilty or innocent, I must needs to be condemned, I shall die cheerfully, having the testimony of a good conscience. And assure yourselves, you shall find it more easy to take away my life than to blast my reputation, or fix any real blot upon my memory." The judges, it is said, were moved by her speech, and approached the king, hoping for clemency for her. But he wouldn't budge, his mind already made up. It was bad timing, as his young queen of 2 months, Madeleine of Valois, had died just 10 days beforehand. He replied that the law must take its course, which meant that women of rank found guilty of treason were to be burned at the stake. This was the sentence passed on Janet Douglas, Lady Glamis. Soon after she was found guilty, she was tied to the stake on Castle Hill. A large crowd had formed and watched as the sentence was carried out. As the flames danced around her, women could be heard sobbing, while men cursed, but Lady Glamis remained calm as the smoke choked her to death. From their prison cells, her husband and son looked on, unable to help her. That night, Campbell escaped, but the following morning his lifeless body was found at the foot of Castle Rock. The king soon regretted his actions that day. This was compounded by Lyon coming clean, telling him he'd made it all up and that Janet Douglas was an innocent woman. Following the death of the king in 1542, John Lyon, now 7th Lord Glamis, was released from prison, and Glamis Castle was restored to him by Parliament, but by then everything of value had been taken. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.